All right, good morning. It is Friday morning. This is I think it's episode 39. It's Friday the 21st of December. And there are a couple of things a bit different. First, it's Friday morning, not Sunday morning. I know I made a big deal last week about being consistent and recording these on Sunday mornings. But there are just a couple of conflicts. There's a wedding this weekend I'm going to, and then also it's the weekend before Christmas, so I thought I'll get it done beforehand. I'm actually in a hotel room. Maybe you can see behind me. I've been working out of town all week, and I'm heading out. I'm heading back this afternoon. But again, I thought I will do this now. So it is early. It's about 5:30, and before I get into the talking points for today, a couple of things. First, thank you to everybody who followed up in all the ways, but particularly to everyone who pointed out that the sound quality last episode was for shit. And I knew it was. I thought maybe I could get away with it in the mix, and then I thought no one would notice, but something's jacked up with the microphone I've been using for the last few months, and I've been avoiding that, and now is the time for me to accept that and buy a new microphone recording unit. So the sound's not great this week either. I'm doing what I can to accommodate, but I will, before January, have that. Appreciate your patience, and I appreciate the kind ways that everyone pointed out last time. Also, the first episode for the first volume of Zenglop, the newsletter, went out last week. So I'm trying to clean that list up. I think I did get a few people respond like, "What the hell is this?" which is totally fine. If you well, here's the thing. If you got a copy of the newsletter and you like it, and you can think of two people who you think might like it, please forward it. And there's a subscribe link in there that actually works, and they can click on that, and then they can subscribe, and then that's all groovy. So in the newsletter, I'm trying to add in some newsletter specific content, and also include at least one article or essay on my blog, so a written piece as well as the podcast, plus some notes that only go out in the newsletter. So it's special content. So let's get started on this early Friday. So if you're watching on the live stream and not listening on the podcast, you can see a window behind me. And I set this up deliberately because one of the things that I have noticed, I've been spending a lot of time in hotels in the last month, and last week I talked about the chud practice, walking by the river, chanting, visualizing, and doing that practice. And this isn't a meditation podcast, so it's not that I'll always be talking about meditation, but it is part of the psychogeography remit of the podcast to challenge how I look at things and to appreciate the landscape around me in a different way. So one of the things I noticed that I was sort of intuitively leading into was meditating in front of the window, particularly when I was up higher in the hotel, and then had the landscape or the cityscape in front of the window. And I noticed this while I was doing the chud, and there were two things I noticed. First was this sense of being on a ledge and looking out over an enormous expanse. And as the meditation stillness took effect, or as I quieted my mind during the meditation, that the broadness of that landscape seemed to increase. and the sense of height seemed to increase. So the idea of practicing on sort of a mountain ledge was nice. I appreciated it from a sort of a poetic or aesthetic stance that I enjoyed the sensation. But then I started thinking of that as part of the practice itself. And in the mornings now, I'll sit and I'll, in the meditation posture, look out on the window. And, if there's different stages, right, I want the body to still so that the mind can be quiet, so that then thoughts and realizations themselves become quiet, or at least become framed against this quiescent background, right? So I can observe them for what they are, as phenomena that arise, pass, and then disperse. If I look out of the window and don't try to actually focus on a particular car or person, right? I noticed that the instinct is to look and catch motion and then look at it, to look at the person walking across, or to identify where the flashing light is coming from, or if there's something flapping in the wind high up. You notice those, and then my attention turns and follows that object to say, oh, yes, I see it's a fire truck, or, oh, it's a person on a bicycle going down on the street. But if I could avoid that instinct to divert my attention to the specific, what I found instead was that the cityscape, the limited slice of it that I can see out of the window there, became this palette of motion at the periphery. And as I would sit for longer, for minutes at a time, other patterns emerged with changes that are on a longer cycle than the immediate. Right? So if my attention becomes something that's stable, then I can, and I'm not focusing on particular items in the landscape. Maybe there is a flashing light off in the far distance that pulses every 15 seconds, maybe. And after sitting for 5 minutes, that pulsing is part of the pattern. Whereas it wouldn't be if I changed my focus every 2 to 3 seconds as people moved by. So it's a really wonderful analogy for the form of sitting and practicing and watching the thought. It's kind of like as the body is stable, you recognize breathing and heartbeat as a consistent pattern, and you're not immediately diverted by each heartbeat or each breath. You can see a stillness unfold, and then the stillness and the quiescence of the thoughts is there. But in between is the stillness and quiescence of the sensory input, which is where this visual input comes in through the eyes into the mind. And if the body is still, then that physical sensation also begins to become not something that's immediately diverting, right? My attention is not immediately diverted by it. And it's a good model for how other input comes in, whether it's sound, sound that in a hotel could be annoying, but isn't, right? Because it's just part of that map of input that now we're not registering as immediately demanding attention. So there's that. But on top of that, I just want to say how beautiful it becomes, right? The out the window here is just around the corner from the World Trade Center. And sometimes my room looks out right on the World Trade Center. But here it looks out, I guess, north. I don't know. I'm betraying my total lack of geography for anywhere other than Pittsburgh. It heads out that way. And being from Pittsburgh, I'll just point out what a bumpkin I sound like. There's more buildings in the immediate window behind me than there is in all of downtown Pittsburgh, and certainly more people living there than in Pittsburgh. So it's quite is quite exhilarating in a sense. And I'm on the 14th floor right now, uh, which is high, but not quite high enough to really get that effect. If you're up above the 30th floor, you really get this effect of extension out. So that's all part of what I would loosely call big sky meditation within the Bonn tradition that I practice. This practice is called big sky because it's a practice deliberately to practice at the top of a mountain. And it's practiced deliberately to acquire the sense of the broad horizon upon which thoughts move. And that the thoughts themselves are simply left as they are. There's no attempt to focus on them, to change them, to remove them. I'm not trying to turn off any of the lights out there. If there's a row of hotel rooms across the road and each one of them has a different TV station on, I actually am able, at a certain point, you start to see the interconnected relationships between all of that. And yeah, maybe those connections are delusions or obscurations of karma, but they're the senses that come in. So I'm talking about this today specifically about the window and meditation. But I've always appreciated the big building, and particularly when I'm traveling and I've got my phone and the camera, I'm quite often taking snapshots of the towers and of the city landscapes, the cityscapes. And I'll post a couple of those in. I think the blog post I'm writing this week in the newsletter talks about that cityscape, and actually how I turn it into music. How the shape of that cityscape, the skyline. That's the word I'm looking for is skyline. I keep saying cityscape, but I really mean the skyline. How the shape of that and the highlights of the different shades of light within that can be mapped into sound. So another plug for the newsletter, you can check that, and I'm going to link to some of the pieces and some of the processes that went into that. So I'm looking at my notes here. Let's take a little coffee. Because as I said, it's now 6 o'clock, so there's no reason to complain. All right, so the second note I've got here in my notebooks. Let me see how to start with this. So a phenomenon that I've noticed here is that everybody is very friendly in the elevator. So this is a trivial point. I'm not trying to make anything out of this that it's not, but I've noted it, and so I'm going to note it here. Friendly, not just to the point of kind of nodding in recognition that the two of us are now going to be in a small box for the next 10 seconds or 15 seconds or however long, but actually initiating conversation. In some cases, introducing themselves with a name. In an elevator, either here in the hotel or in the office building or in the complex around the building where there are shops and lunch places and whatever. But actually, like, hey, my name's Skip. And I'm like, oh, no, I don't know. So I mentioned this to some of the people who live here, because it doesn't happen in Pittsburgh. People don't introduce themselves to me when I'm in the elevator at home. Not at home. I don't have an elevator in the house at home, but at home meaning in the home office. And I brought it up in a small meeting just to get things started, and everyone look, they laugh, they no, no, that doesn't happen. And in fact, you would expect the reverse. You would expect New York, I think, are proud of their indifference, or at least they like to pretend to be indifferent. They're not. It's a lovely city with lovely people. But this seemed to be extreme, and I thought, well, do I just look that friendly? I mean, you can't see on the podcast, but I've got bald, I've got a big beard. I like to think that I look sort of intimidating and austere, like some strange Orthodox priest from some maybe Estonia or something like that. But what they say is maybe I look like Santa Claus because my beard is white. So maybe that's it. The image I have in mind actually is of Arvo Part. There's a video recording of Bjork interviewing Arvo Part. And he's got a good look going on. He also Michael Stipe in the last few years has grown a big old beard. And I think that's a good look. Bald with a big beard. So I'm going to try and tie. I told you, I said this was a trivial point. It's an amusing anecdote. Friendly to the point where in the hotel here, there's actually two banks of elevators, and you can't see one from the other. So I was waiting at one of them, and someone came from the other bank and said, "Hey," and I'm waiting for a while, and someone came from the other bank and said, "Hey, the elevator's here. Come on in. Come on in." All right. So if I try to tie that back in to the big sky, I don't think I'll be able to do this, but I'm gonna try. When I look out at the cityscape, at the skyline, there's this sense of distance, right? But this distance is very evocative of everything because the distance incorporates everything, not just the lights and the constructs of the building and my projections onto that, but the distance from it allows for the emergence of everything within it. All of those lights and passing by is an element of humanity, right? That's a pretty dry term, but it's someone's life. It's a window, literally, to someone's life, looking out and seeing some ephemeral piece of a full life, some unintended blip that the details are unseeable and unknowable. But riding your bike, a quarter mile away, I have no insight into the details of that instant. It's this trail, this poetic trail that you are leaving behind you that I can see. And all I can see is the trail, and the trail is gone, like a breath. And the light in a window, in an office window that turns off or turns on, is someone coming or going, leaving their day, going to their home, and all of that in and out woven together is this churn that is part of this big sky that is not permanent because they're not threads that weave and stay. The buildings appear to stay because they have a longer duration or a longer half-life, but the passage of the people appears to create this cloth of perception, but it's a cloth that is constantly changing because none of the threads last more than a fraction of a second, in and gone. So this big sky distance is not unconnected. It's not um, disassociated. Quite the opposite. It's actually a magnificent outpouring of compassion, and but two-way. You know, the compassion that I feel for that vision, that view, and the sense of compassion returned as these basic human interactions occur. Uh, and it, and so much of it is unintended. This phrase "unintended intimacy" is something that I wrote down a few years ago, and always thought that I would write a poem detailing unintended intimacies. You know, when I do something uh, on a bus, just fixing myself, getting ready for the day, I don't intend anyone to see that, but people do. Like I see people fixing themselves, and the and none of it is meant as a display. Uh, but we move by with this intimacy is unintended, and so there's sometimes a lack of awareness of it. And I would say that there's a challenge to just generally be open and aware of these moments, not to participate in them, but to allow them to flourish and fill the space with that sensation. So the unintended intimacy. I wanted to write a poem like that, and I didn't, and partly because I'm not really a poet as much as I would like to be. Um, but WH Auden is a poet, was a poet, and he is the poet of that moment, of that unintended intimacy. And I'm pretty sure I've done this in an earlier episode, that I've read this poem that I'm about to read now, and talked about this before. But I'm going to do it again now because I feel like it's just a nice framing of it, with this sense of big sky and early morning. I'm going to reach over here and get my Surface tablet here, and I'm going to open up the poem that I'm going to read, having just given Microsoft a free plug there for their Surface tablet, which I hope they appreciate and compensate accordingly. So the poem I'm going to read and end the podcast with this. So I'm going to read WH Auden, As I Walked Out One Evening. Let's see what happened here. I know that this is compelling radio and compelling I just had it. Okay. I'm dancing on my toes here a bit to fill space. But this is the danger of the live stream, right? Looks like I did not successfully save the link, so I'm going to open that up again. The silence, I know, is compelling on the podcast. What I'm doing for the record here is trying to restore the pages I had and open up a new page, because my browser crashed, and I'm not sure if it's because of the Wi-Fi here at the hotel, or if it's because I did something too quickly. But hang on a second. Now I'm going to. I know the magic is gone now, right? The moment has failed. As I walked out one evening by WH Auden. Here we go. Okay, we're getting back on track now. Here we go. All right. So again, just to regroup from that, that moment of unintended intimacy, those many moments that are part of the precognition of the moment as part of big sky meditation, and particularly what I'm specifically talking about now is applying that insight to looking out a hotel window, meditating, achieving a moment of stillness physically, a moment of mental, like mind calm, and in between there is this sensorium of calmness and openness where input that would otherwise have immediately distracted me, like the flashing of a light or the passing of a car or a cyclist riding by, instead of focusing on them, following them, allowing those to form this interwoven connection of fleeting moments. So here is WH Auden as I walked out one evening. As I walked out one evening, walking down Bristol Street, the crowds upon the pavement were fields of harvest wheat. And down by the brimming river I heard a lover sing under an arch of the railway, "Love has no ending. I'll love you, dear. I'll love you till China and Africa meet, and the river jumps over the mountain, and the salmon sing in the street. I'll love you till the ocean is folded and hung up to dry, and the 7 stars go squawking like geese about the sky. The years shall run like rabbits, for in my arms I hold the flower of the ages and the first love of the world." But all the clocks in the city began to whir and chime. Oh, let not time deceive you. You cannot conquer time. In the burrows of the nightmare where justice naked is, time watches from the shadow and coughs when you would kiss. In headaches and in worry, vaguely life leaks away, and time will have his fancy tomorrow or today. Into many a green valley drifts the appalling snow. Time breaks the threaded dances and the diver's brilliant bow. Oh, plunge your hands in water, plunge them in up to the wrist. Stare at the basin and wonder what you've missed. The glacier knocks in the cupboard, the desert sighs in the bed, and the crack in the teacup opens a lane to the land of the dead, where the beggar raffles the banknotes and the giant is enchanting to Jack, and the lily-white boy is Aurora, and Jill goes down on her back. Oh, look in the mirror. Oh, look in your distress. Life remains a blessing, although you cannot bless. Oh, stand at the window as the tears scold and start. You shall love your crooked neighbor with your crooked heart. It was late in the evening. The lovers, they were gone. The clocks had ceased their chiming, and the deep river ran on. So as I walked out one evening by Auden, I'll put a link in. I think there's a video, or at least a YouTube video of a recording of Auden reading that, so you can listen to him. He has a wonderful reading voice. And listen again. See, there's 2 main voices, right? There was 3. There's the narrator, the poet, who first overhears the lover singing, and then the clock rings, and the clock is the second part of the poem is the voice of the clock. I love that line, the crack in the teacup. I think that was the line I talked about in an earlier episode. But today I'm really struck by the penultimate stanza, So the clock, it sounds a bit like an asshole at first, right? And it's certainly a downer. But this second to last stanza of the poem, the last stanza of the clock speaking. Stand, stand at the window as the tears scold and start. You shall love your crooked neighbor with your crooked heart. And Auden just has, like, this is what I mean by Auden being the poet of the unintended consequences. He's also such a generous poet in terms of recognizing the failings, the foibles of human nature, and the sort of unseen capacity of love to overcome those foibles. So the word crooked there, I think I'm reading as meaning sort of flawed, foolish, foibles, all of those. Um, unintended, the unintended intimacies of the crooked neighbor and the crooked heart. So, all right, I'm going to switch off now, maybe get another cup of coffee and prepare for my day here. So thanks for watching. Again, I'm going to try and get Sunday mornings for the live stream and get the newsletter out on Monday mornings. So again, keep an eye out for that. And I do want to just ask to pass it along. It's important for me to get that newsletter subscription healthy. I've got about 200 people on there right now, which is really fantastic. And again, it does generate comment. I mean, people like email, which is great. I like email, and the ability to put together a longer response than Facebook or text or whatever allows. Take advantage of that. I've appreciated the feedback that I've gotten. So cheers, keep your wits about you, and I will talk to you again next week.